March 7, 1945. The Rhine lay cold and swollen beneath a sky the color of worn steel, its surface broken by drifting ice and the slow churn of floodwater. On the west bank near Remagen, American infantrymen of the 9th Armored Division moved through the ruins of a town that smelled of wet plaster, smoke, and cordite, every breath a mixture of winter decay and fresh destruction. Ahead of them, through haze and shattered masonry, the Ludendorff Bridge appeared like a black spine across the river, still standing when it should have been rubble. German engineers were already trying to kill it with explosives. German artillery was already ranging in. German fighters would soon come screaming down through clouds to drop bombs on its steel trusses. The river was supposed to be Germany's last natural barrier in the West, the line that bought time for miracle weapons, for negotiations, for some reversal of fate. But that morning, America found a door left open for a moment and walked through it. This is where the story begins, not because the Rhine crossing was the first time Germany tried everything, but because it was the moment their last everything began to fail in full view. By 1945, Germany had exhausted the traditional logic of war: maneuver, counterattack, fortified lines, propaganda, terror, even the oldest faith that suffering itself could be turned into strength. And still the American armies advanced. The Wehrmacht and the SS threw armor into firestorms, burned their own cities to deny shelter, flooded valleys, dynamited bridges, conscripted boys and old men, and launched weapons that sounded like the future: jets, rockets, guided bombs, while their enemies came forward with something far less dramatic and far more decisive: supply, replacement, repair. Repetition. Germany fought like a nation trying to argue with mathematics. America fought like a nation that had already solved the equation. To understand why that bridge mattered, one has to understand what the Rhine represented inside German minds by the final winter of the war. In 1940, Germany's victories had been fast enough to feel like revelation. The Blitzkrieg had not merely defeated opponents, it had rewritten the idea of what a modern army could do. For years, Hitler had told his people that will, discipline, and ideological unity could overcome anything. In 1941 and 1942, even as the war widened, that belief still held a strange magnetism, because early victories made faith feel practical. But by 1944, the war had become a contest not of daring but of output. The Allies did not need to be perfect. They needed only to keep coming. Germany saw this truth clearly and still tried to escape it. They tried to split the alliance. They tried to shatter morale. They tried to win technologically. They tried to win by terror. They tried to win by weather. They tried to win by making the battlefield so chaotic that nothing could be coordinated and nothing could be trusted. Yet the American advance was not a single push. It was a system moving forward, one that absorbed losses, repaired itself, and continued. Because the machine behind it was larger than any single defeat. The emotional contrast that defined 1944 and 1945 was felt most sharply by German soldiers themselves. Many had been raised on the myth of the American: wealthy, soft, dependent on comfort, unfit for hardship. German officers, trained in a tradition that prized operational finesse, believed American forces would be predictable, clumsy, unable to sustain pressure when casualties rose. They expected a nation that would tire. What they met instead was a nation that industrialized perseverance. American units might be cautious, sometimes even slow, but they were almost never gone. If a German battalion bled an American regiment on Monday, it found itself facing fresh American artillery, more tanks, more fuel, more air support on Tuesday. German soldiers learned a new kind of dread, not fear of a single attack, but fear of the next one, and the next one after that, and the next, delivered with the dull certainty of machinery. One recurring sound came to define that certainty: the low, steady rumble of American trucks. Not the scream of dive bombers, not the thunder of a barrage, but the constant engine noise of supply columns rolling forward day and night. For German defenders, that rumble carried a meaning more corrosive than artillery. It meant the enemy could afford to be patient. It meant the enemy had fuel. It meant the enemy could rotate units, feed men, move ammunition, bring engineers, bridges, bulldozers, hospital tents, radio batteries. Spare parts, everything that turned a battlefield from a heroic contest into a production process. That rumble became the symbol in this story, the sound of American abundance, the acoustic signature of democracy's industrial reach. It was not romantic, it was not glorious, it was relentless. Germany tried everything in Normandy first, because if the Allies could be thrown back into the sea, the war might return to a political argument. After June 6, 1944, the German army fought with what remained of its tactical brilliance. Counterattacks at the beachhead, hedgerow defense, ambush tactics, fast-moving reserves thrown into the gap. But the American advance did not depend on one perfect day. It depended on keeping a pipeline open across the Atlantic and then widening it. Each week that the beachhead survived, American port capacity expanded, fuel depots multiplied, ammunition dumps appeared like new towns. When the breakout came, Operation Cobra in late July, Germany discovered that once the Americans achieved operational space, they did not merely exploit it, they flooded it. U.S. forces poured through gaps faster than German command could close them, because closing them required fuel, trucks, radios, and reserves Germany no longer had in adequate quantity. The Germans tried to answer mobility with obstruction. They mined roads, cratered intersections, destroyed bridges. They turned France into a landscape of broken arteries. And yet American engineers followed the advance like a second army. Bailey bridges appeared overnight. Bulldozers pushed through hedgerows and rubble. Road repair teams moved forward under fire. The system did not stop because it had redundancy. More trucks than necessary, more engineers than required, more fuel than any European army had ever dreamed of spending. Germany could destroy a bridge, America could build another. Germany could blow a rail yard, America could reroute. Germany could turn a highway into a trench. America could lay down steel matting and keep moving. When German resistance hardened, Germany tried to make the war about fear. The V1 and V2 campaigns were meant to crack Allied morale, to punish civilians, to prove that Germany still held a mysterious advantage. The V2, especially, was a weapon that sounded like prophecy. A ballistic missile falling from the edge of space, striking without warning. It killed thousands, terrorized cities, and consumed enormous resources. Yet strategically, it could not stop the advance. It was a scream aimed at the sky, while the war was being decided on roads and railheads and fuel dumps. America's answer to the terror weapons was not a single counterweapon, but the larger logic of the war. Factories replaced losses, cities repaired, air forces intensified bombing, and armies kept moving. The rumble of trucks continued beneath the distant thunder of rockets. Germany tried to win in the air with brilliance and desperation. They fielded the Me-262 jet, faster than anything Allied pilots had seen, and for brief moments it seemed like a sliver of the old German promise: technology as salvation. But jets required trained pilots, spare parts, fuel, and airfields that weren't cratered daily by Allied bombers. The Me-262 arrived in too few numbers, too late, under conditions that strangled its potential. Even wonder weapons became victims of logistics. It was not that German engineers lacked genius. It was that genius could not substitute for petroleum and rubber and aluminum and time. As 1944 turned to winter, Germany attempted its greatest gamble, the Ardennes offensive. They tried everything: surprise, weather, deception, the exploitation of Allied complacency. They attacked where the forest and snow made Allied air power irrelevant. They pushed armored columns through a sector held by tired or green American units. They aimed for Antwerp. They wanted to split the Anglo-American armies and force negotiation. For the first days, it worked enough to frighten commanders and confuse maps. Some American units were surrounded. Roads choked with refugees and retreating troops. The sky stayed low and gray, grounding Allied aircraft. But this is where the difference between Germany's everything and America's, still advanced, became brutally clear. Germany's offensive was fueled by a shrinking reservoir. It depended on capturing Allied fuel dumps because Germany did not have enough fuel to sustain the advance. Their tanks did not fail because crews lacked courage, but because gasoline did. Their spearheads did not stop because ambition vanished, but because supply lines could not feed them. And when the weather cleared, Allied aircraft returned like a verdict. The German columns, forced onto a limited road network, became targets in open snowfields. Meanwhile, American logistics did what it was built to do: moved reinforcements with speed that German planners did not believe possible. Patton's Third Army pivoted north. Fresh divisions arrived. Ammunition kept coming. The rumble of trucks did not diminish, it multiplied. Germany tried to use infiltration and impersonation to break the American system, commandos in U.S. uniforms, road signs altered, rumors seeded to create paranoia. For a moment, it worked psychologically. Americans asked one another questions about baseball and hometown streets, trying to identify imposters. But the larger system absorbed the confusion. It tightened procedures. It kept moving. The war could not be won on trickery when the opponent's supply chain ran deeper than the trick. When the Bulge collapsed, Germany's options narrowed to a final defense. They tried to make rivers the new fortresses. They tried to make ruins the new trenches. They tried to turn every village into a killing zone. They hoped the Rhine would be a wall. And that brings us back to Remagen, to the Ludendorff Bridge, to the moment when America walked through a door that Germany failed to close in time. The Germans did try to close it. They fired artillery until barrels glowed. They sent fighter bombers to collapse the span. They even used the bizarre late-war arsenal, jet aircraft and rocket-propelled weapons, attempting to sever the crossing. But the Americans poured across anyway. Engineers raced to stabilize the bridge while infantry moved over it under fire. Within days, pontoon bridges and treadway bridges multiplied, turning a narrow crossing into a flowing artery. The Rhine did not stop the American advance, it accelerated it. In the West, Germany's cities became the final battlefield. The Allies advanced into Cologne, Frankfurt, Wurzburg, Nuremberg. German troops, increasingly composed of exhausted veterans, Volksgrenadiers, and teenagers, fought among ruins. The Americans responded not with romantic bayonet charges, but with combined arms, infantry, tanks, artillery, engineers, air support when weather allowed. The pattern repeated. German units inflicted casualties, sometimes serious ones, then were outflanked, suppressed, isolated. And always the trucks came forward, bringing more shells, more fuel, more bread, more medical supplies. In that final spring, it became clear that Germany could no longer trade blood for time. The time bought was not enough. America's system consumed time and turned it into pressure. On the other end of Europe, the Soviet advance was closing like a steel vise. Germany tried to pull forces east and west, but it could not be strong everywhere. Their rail system was broken, fuel was scarce, command was fractured, airfields were cratered. The Reich became a shrinking pocket of functions without resources. And inside that shrinking pocket, belief itself began to corrode. There were men in German uniforms who still believed victory was possible, because ideology is sometimes strongest at the edge of extinction. But many more understood the truth in their bones. They were fighting the output of continents. Germany had tried to win fast and had failed. It had tried to win through terror and had failed. It had tried to win through technology and had failed. It had tried to win through surprise and had failed. It had tried to win through sacrifice and had failed. And it was failing for the simplest reason: the enemy could replace everything. The historical evidence is merciless. American production numbers during the war, aircraft, trucks, tanks, ships, were not merely higher than Germany's. They were of a different order. American shipyards and factories could take damage and still produce. American agriculture fed not only American troops but allies. American oil powered fleets, aircraft, and mechanized armies on multiple fronts. Germany, under blockade and bombing, ran out of fuel and then ran out of options. Even the most capable field commander cannot maneuver without gasoline. Even the bravest unit cannot hold when it is outgunned and outsupplied indefinitely. For German soldiers, the emotional breaking point often came not when a particular city fell, but when they encountered American abundance up close, captured ration tins, trucks loaded with supplies, field kitchens producing hot meals, medics with morphine and plasma, engineers with bridging equipment and bulldozers. It did not feel like facing a single army. It felt like facing a civilization that could turn its economy into warfare without starving its people, that could produce both comfort and destruction in parallel. And in that parallel production lay the deeper ideological defeat, the recognition that democracy, chaotic and argumentative, had proven more capable of sustaining total war than a dictatorship built on fear and forced unity. The rumble of trucks, the symbol of this script, was not just logistics, it was philosophy made audible. It was the sound of a nation whose internal systems, industrial, agricultural, financial, social, could generate surplus. Surplus becomes options. Options become resilience. Resilience becomes the ability to advance even after setbacks. Germany tried everything because it was running out of options. America still advanced because it had options to spare. When the war ended in May 1945, it did not end with a single brilliant maneuver or a final cinematic duel. It ended with collapse. The German state's machinery ran dry. The propaganda could no longer mask ruins. Commanders surrendered armies not because they stopped fighting, but because fighting no longer had a strategic meaning. Hitler died in a bunker while the Allied armies closed in. The Reich that was promised to last 1,000 years lasted 12, and yet the story's most important meaning lies in what came after. The crushing of the Nazi war dream was not merely a military outcome. It was a demonstration that the modern world belongs to systems more than slogans. Germany's attempt to build power through conquest and ideology ran into the hard ceiling of industrial reality. America's power came not from one weapon or one general, but from the infrastructure behind everything. The factories, the farms, the railroads, the oil wells, the shipyards, the schools that trained engineers, the institutions that allowed mass mobilization without total collapse. The epilogue is quieter than the battles. The Rhine still flows. The Ardennes forest grows back. Remagen's bridge is gone, collapsed days after capture, its wreckage taken by the current. But the lesson remains in the sound that replaced wartime silence across Europe: engines rebuilding, trains moving, cranes lifting steel into new shapes. Empires do not fall only when armies lose. They fall when their underlying assumptions about power are disproven. Nazi Germany believed fear could substitute for prosperity, ideology for oil, will for supply. America proved otherwise. Not by rhetoric, not by myths, but by the steady mechanical rhythm of an advancing system. Listen to the war in its final year, and you can hear the difference. Germany's sound is the frantic clatter of improvised defense. Last shells, last fuel, last men. America's sound is the rumble that never stops. Trucks on wet roads, engines turning, supplies moving forward. It is not a heroic sound. It is not a glorious sound. It is the sound of inevitability. And that is why Germany tried everything, because everything was all it had left. America still advanced, because it had built a civilization capable of turning abundance into endurance, and endurance into victory.